Hey there, Kiara.
Hey, Nilima.
It's the 25th of March, and I noticed I logged into Zoom at 11:11, and I saw you try to log in at the same time as
Oh,
11:11.
interesting.
So let that be a good sign that the doors are open to the divine planes, and they're here with us. So we wanted to go over our sense of what's going on at this time based on the supramental yoga of Mother Sri Aurobindo, which is also deeply connected to the yoga of the cells, as we know.
Exactly.
And I was just reading your uh, Corona diaries, and you posted day 2. And what we can do is, along with this recording, we can also share day 1 and day 2. So we don't need to go over all of that.
Hmm.
But in a nutshell, would you like to begin with how you are connecting what's happening today with the supramental catastrophe and perhaps even the connection to Shiva?
Wow. Yeah, this just sends tingles down my spine. It's something I've been dreaming about and researching and feeling and working with for so long. And as we all have, knowingly or unknowingly. And I think,
Kiara, maybe speak up a little more because I think you're still a little soft.
okay. So, yeah, so what I was saying is that this whole event that we're experiencing as the corona virus is really so much more than what we think. There's so much going on behind the scenes, underneath the collective consciousness of humanity. And I see this as all part of an awakening that has been prepared. We've been preparing for this and working with this for such a long time. And this is the work that Sri Aurobindo and the mother initiated a long, long time ago. And once it's set into the ethers, it's something that's inevitable. And we can go back to 1956, the supramental day, 29th of February, when the first descent of the supramental consciousness took place upon Earth. And by supramental, what I mean is it's a unified light that emanates from that boundary of creation. So it's not something that we can understand in terms of the opposites of light and dark, as our minds tend to interpret this. But it's a unified light that's stepping into creation for the very, very first time. And so it's a new experiment that we are entering into as a planetary consciousness, as a human consciousness, as a species of humanity. So this is what's so exciting for me, that this is something that's brand new, it's happening collectively, and there's a sense of ease and grace with this. As long as we're in this battle between dark and light, there's always a duality, there's always a conflict, there's always a war, there's always effort, there's always a trying to make something happen. And as we go beyond that duality into that unified light, something just, all we need do is allow. All we need do is open. And the new frequencies begin to radiate through our surrendered consciousness. And so this is what I see happening. So when we talk about Shiva, Shiva is the cosmic force representing transformation. In the Hindu tradition, he's often represented as a god of destruction. And that's one aspect of this. And the other aspect of this is new creation. So every time there's something that collapses, there's always something new that arises. And Shiva always is represented as covered with ash. And somehow this ash represents the dissolving into the fire of an old consciousness, of an old paradigm, of an old mindset that we are now ready to let go. And it's been many, many, many years, many, many generations that we have awaited this time. So it's really exciting to me now that, this particular time with the coronavirus, whatever that represents, and we could go into this, we could speak about what the coronavirus actually represents behind our common conceptions of this. But this is the time I feel like finally, what we've been awaiting for such a long time is beginning to embody. It's like we are beginning to embody ourselves into this plane of consciousness, into our material reality, into the mind of the cells. So it's like as we open up into the upper worlds, we're also moving down into the lower worlds. So as we're opening our minds to higher levels of awareness, we're also moving down into cellular levels of awareness. And all this is happening simultaneously. So yeah, so let's talk about this. Where shall we begin?
So, let me just build on what you have said. This February was 21st February is the mother's birthday. Coincidentally, it was also Mahashivaratri,
Right.
and which is the great night of Shiva, where the Shiva consciousness is active very strongly in the terrestrial planes. They say Shiva's realm, Shiva Lok, is very close to the human realm, and therefore on that night those two come together, and in a way the gates are open between them. And then this year 2020 is also the golden year. It's the leap year, the anniversary of the supramental descent of 29th February 1956. So in a way it's the 16th anniversary,
Exactly.
or rather 64 years, which is another beautiful archetypal number of the 64 yoginis, which is another complete archetype. So it was almost as if the prayer, when Mother and Sri Aurobindo were in a way gathering, Mother was particularly speaking to all the divinities involved in the creation to say, would you participate in the new creation? And each one is Lord of their own creation, and therefore didn't really have to say yes. But that is why Mother said, I can't coerce them, I can't force them, I can only invite their collaboration. So it was a very slow process, but little by little, all could see the goodness of a unified creation. And so they all collaborated one by one. And Shiva was the last. In a way, he came and he said to them, look, once you get everyone in, then ask me, I will join, but I'll come last. And
Right.
that's because he in a way represents that non-dual consciousness where all the beings of all kinds of all forces, he's beyond positive and negative, so all those forces hang around him. And so it was his wisdom to say, I can only come once everyone else has agreed, otherwise my force will just perhaps topple the apple cart,
Yeah.
And because it was Shivaratri along with Mother's birthday, we set a very powerful intention in our 64 Yogini group on the full moon of February that we invoke both together, so that here on he arrives, and we can move in this month of 3. So we're working every with archetypal numbers this year, so January we invoke the number 0, which is the womb space, and February we invoked both the number 1 and the 2 for Shiva and Shakti. And so in March, full moon, we invoked the number 3, which is effectively the triality. And so that in this month, we are shifting from duality consciousness to triality consciousness, where we can, instead of moving between the separation of the 1 and the 2, we can move to a pulse, to a
So it's a
quantum
unified
photonic
mind.
pulse of
Yeah.
0, where everything returns momentarily to its source, and then 3, where it expresses as a triality, where the womb space, the 0 along with the 1 and the 2, the yin and the yang, so in a way the Tao is fully expressed. So it's 0 and 3, 0 and 3, 0 and 3. So therefore, we don't have to experience pain of separation, because in the moment that we are expressed, we are whole. And then we return to the potentiality before we appear as yet another level of whole. So
It's the
it's
power.
a different mode of being from this month onwards,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
So,
yeah, go ahead.
I see it, from duality to synthesis. So when
Yes,
it's a conflict between dark and light, right and wrong, good and bad, balancing opposites, from there you're integrating both of them into a new synthesis, which is very different from a duality. So when you're
yes. So
talking
it's very
about the
different. So
Asura
we are
and
being, it's almost as if we are being asked to move from one way of dancing
yeah,
to another way of dancing. Like the
right,
music's changed,
right, yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's so interesting. So one more important thing I wanted to share with someone like you, Kiara, because you would understand, having read a lot on Sat Prem's book, Mind of the Cells, where the mother describes the yoga of the cells, that she says salvation is physical. And if we have to move into the new creation, the new consciousness, it's going to need a new body, right? We're
mm,
going to have, we can't have a divine life without a divine body, right? And so she was working at supramentalizing the cells so that the cells of the human body became capable of bearing the new consciousness and therefore becoming more plastic, having plasticity, having capacities way beyond what the current or the old cellular and material structure was capable of, right? And this is where I am having this sense, and I just want to share and air it with you, that what if, given the world had become technologically connected and we simply, we finally become capable of communicating at a global level, and just in time arrives the leap year and the golden day, and we needed an initiatory trigger to activate the potentiality in the cells. Now,
mm,
the mother, towards the end of her incarnation, had brought down so much of the supramental energy into her cells that when she, quote unquote, left her body or died, uh, we know that yogis and yoginis of such high attainment don't really die in the way ordinary human consciousness dies. So right through her, way after the supramental descent, she was actively passing on the supramental energy through her cells to anyone she was in contact with and at a global level. And she even called it the positive contagion, right?
mm,
She's
mm,
saying the only way the species is going to get um, to catch the vibration is it
mm,
has to be like a contagion, right?
right,
So it is my sense that when she left in on the 17th November 1973, she kind of decentralized herself so that her cells became effectively pollen grains, and they went into all our bodies, or they became positive viruses, and they may just, I've done genetics and virology studies and so on, so I understand how it works, that a positive, all evolution happens through mutation, positive mutation, which creates the next order of species. And my sense is, what if she had put her cells into all the human bodies that it had contacted, and her DNA or her RNA, whatever it was, entered into and spliced into the host cell and
mm,
its DNA, and right, so thereby beginning the positive mutation. And what if that capacity was lying latent until the moment was right for a mass trigger event? What if this virus is that mass trigger event? Think about it. It's come on strong. Yes, it was around sometime in December, Jan, Feb, but it's really post 29th Feb that is kind of really
exactly,
suddenly
exactly,
activated. Uh,
exactly.
so they say, tell a, life is meaningless. You tell a high quality story, you will have a high quality experience. You tell a poor quality story, you will have a poor quality experience. So here's a high quality story for a high quality experience. What if we believe and intend that whatever is this virus, there are enough of us holding those imaginal cells of the mother and that in our DNA, and that when this vibration of the virus encounters the vibration of the mother's cells and wherever it is in the population, and certainly I would think in all of us who have invoked her and worked with her for so many years, what if in that moment, the antivirus gets created
Right.
because the imaginal cell has the capacity. And effectively, we become the vaccine. And we start creating the antibodies. And wherever we have gone since, we have actually positively activated or infected the population with the antibody in that supramental catastrophic way, which is in a very benign way with very, very mild symptoms, if at all, or maybe none at all, but we have naturally immunized the population, right? And the mother says, we need two things when something dangerous like this happens. One is we need to maintain just a happy, sunny attitude, a goodwill towards life and faith in the grace. Second is we have to exercise a strong will of saying no to the disease and no to the fear, and basically keeping the guard up. So a goodwill and a strong will. And those of us who have been capable of doing that, there's a good chance we've actually flipped the encounter with this virus and its vibration and turned it and ourselves into the mother's immune
Mm,
system.
imaginal cells. Yeah, and then there's something called herd immunity, which has to do with a certain critical mass at which the entire species develops an immunity. And in this case, it's not an immunity to a virus.
Speak louder, yeah.
Actually, it's actually an integrity where the new consciousness can descend. I'm reminded when you speak about the triality that we're
Yes.
also talking about this in terms of the mind. So, you know, there's the conscious mind, and then there's the higher levels of the mind. So as you reach up towards the supramental, you pass through the higher mind, the illumined mind, the intuitive mind, the overmind, finally to the supermind. And then the third leg of this is the cellular mind beneath. So all these levels of the mind above need to be integrated through the conscious mind and then into the cellular mind. So it's not like there's one direction opposing the other direction. Somehow it's like the supramental consciousness enters through our conscious will and intention, through the physical body, all the way into the inconscient, all the way into the foundation of Mother Earth, into the heart of Gaia. And from there, something new can flower. And I want to share an experience that I had in the Matri Mandir about this. Actually, before I do this, I want to share something I experienced in Peru. This was back in 2010 when I was there with some other people, and we were doing some ayahuasca journeys. And as you and many others have been experiencing with ayahuasca, there's an opportunity to open the doors to the higher worlds, but it requires that we are able to hold those energies um, through a conscious intention. Otherwise, it creates a split. And so for about a week, I was um, experiencing the ayahuasca, um, the goddess ayahuasca, every night, very, very intensely. And the intention I held with this was to allow Shiva to come through the body and descend into the heart of Mother Earth. And at first, the energies were so strong. And I really felt like if this energy was allowed to move without hindrance, it could completely shatter the physical body of the earth. And so from the second night onwards, I started to call on the energy of the mother, the divine mother. And so there was a blending and an integration process, and it was still extremely powerful and strong, but there was also an ability to receive this much more fluently. And so night after night, this happened until at the end of this, my body was completely exhausted, but I felt like something had happened, that was important, that I was now able to hold a certain vibrational field within the body. And maybe something that I could then help to extend into the body of the earth when the timing was right. Okay, so going backwards a few years, I remember the first time that I came to Oroville back in 2002 with Grace, whom you know. And we went into the Matrimandir. This is for those of you who may not know this is the golden temple, a spherical temple of the mother. In the center of Matrimandir, it represents the energies of the descent, of the supramental descent, and was designed by the mother to hold her consciousness and to quietly and powerfully bring the supramental light down to integrate with our consciousness here. So the first time we were there in 2002, Grace had this vision while we were sitting across from each other on opposite sides of the giant crystal in the middle. And what happened is that Shiva appeared to her, just covered with ash, with a top knot, and looking really wild. And she was a bit scared, not knowing who he was, and wondering, it's like, what's he doing here? And who is he? Can I trust this being? And he was offering her this golden egg. And at that time, she refused because she didn't know who he was. She wasn't sure that she was ready to receive this, whatever this was. And then once she realized who this was, it was like, oh my God, I missed this opportunity. But of course, there's no missed opportunity. It's always a matter of timing. And so for the next 18 years, she and I continued to go into the Matrimandir every year around this time. And this year, what happened during the supramental day, immediately after this, there was that he came back. And I'd been feeling a descent of Shiva, independently of all this. I was starting to feel Sri Aurobindo walking around inside my body. And what I felt was that in his lifetime, he had been able to embody an aspect of Krishna consciousness, which is this avatar energy that was ready at that time to descend. But he was not able to incarnate Shiva. Like you said, it wasn't time yet. And it's only when the stage is set fully that energy can come through. And so what was starting to happen at this time was that I felt Shiva's consciousness and energy moving through the body. And I understood what this was like because of the ayahuasca experience in Peru, when I felt his energy so strongly moving through and beginning to integrate that into the cells. So this time, as I was holding that field, he came back and he offered this golden egg once again to Grace. And this time she understood what this was about, and she very, gratefully and joyfully was able to receive this. And it was like, for days afterwards, she wasn't even able to speak because it was such a deep inner experience. And then over the next few days, what is happening is that this egg, very unexpectedly for her, planted itself like a seed into the earth. And just like you're saying, it was like this new consciousness becoming a contagion that can actually express itself into the heart of the earth, and from there begin to radiate out into all of life, into all of creation. And that was, like you said, the beginning of the lockdowns, the spread of this virus. It's also interesting to me that it's known as the coronavirus. Corona what? Represents the crown.
Yeah.
And in a way, this is the crowning of creation. And everything in the universe is intelligent. Everything in creation has a life force, has a purpose. And we think of viruses as something insignificant just because they're so small. And we treat them as if as something to get rid of. So we have a cold, we get rid of the cold. We have a flu or typhoid or whatever. It's an epidemic. We see it as something to hunt down, to get rid of. But that's not how nature operates. And to nature, this is a means for new energies or new um, blueprints to be activated within the whole. So, what I'm sensing with all this is that the virus represents a crown energy, it represents a supramental light, um,
Yes.
which is slowly becoming incarnated within the earth. And as um, people are forced to remain indoors, they're forced to take time to themselves, they're forced to go into states of inner awareness, meditation, or just letting go of the rat race. Somehow, something is opening up inside. And everyone I speak with is talking about how this has been such an opening for them. There's so much joy, so much light that's pouring through, creative gifts opening up. It's a time unlike anything in recent history where we are coming back in touch with ourselves. And Sri Aurobindo has always been speaking about the new species. We're moving from the animal human, where we've been basically focused on instinctive awareness, instinctive gifts, to the human, where the rational mind has been um, becoming dominant, and now into the divine human, which is the realm of the soul. We're connecting with the soul of Gaia, we're connecting with our own inner self, we're connecting with the soul of the universe. We're connecting with each other from the space of oneness, where the supramental force can now come through as never before. So this is how I see this time, that it's literally the creation of the divine human species, as Sri Aurobindo named it, the sun-eyed children of a new dawn. Um, and simultaneously, for those who are ready, this could also be the awakening of the supramental species. This is not something that has been experienced before in physical creation.
Yeah.
And it's still relatively unknown. I'm not sure exactly what to think about it or how to define it. Um, Even for the mother and Sri Aurobindo, this was a very, very um, unknowable and unspeakable um, experience.
They called
Of,
it the adventure of consciousness
yeah,
because it's never been done before, and it requires the heart of a hero and a heroine. The courage to go into these uncharted territories.
yeah.
But I want to take a moment to also talk about how, at a time like this, it's almost everybody is being rubber banded back towards their natural level of consciousness. So it's almost as if humanity is moving into a spectrum,
Mm,
uh, and there are people who are in this beautiful state of calm and peace, like you are embodying right now, and seeing the positive, and having a certain perspective that this is somehow a miracle and a grace and a blessing and a moment we've been waiting for. And equally, at the other end, there are people who are in such panic, such
mm,
fear, um, who are kind of locking themselves into their basements, and you know so it's this incredible spectrum. And as you were saying, this is a time where some people who are ready may actually be able to morph their bodies into a whole new uh, level and kind of embodiment. but equally, there are people who are getting siloed or, separated
Mm,
into these different levels of consciousness, very starkly almost. So,
mm,
what is your sense of that?
mm. Yeah, this is a very crucial question, I think. We talk about the pandemic. I see it more as a panicdemic.
Yes.
This um, much of it is manufactured by the media, the panic itself.
Yeah.
There have been pandemics of all sorts, and this is normal. This is part of our human civilization, as part of our evolution. We develop immunities, we move on.
Yeah.
Uh, our immune systems get stronger. We survive and we thrive. But what's been happening now is that the media has been manipulating this in such a way that it's creating panic, and the fear is taking people down into um, um, infection, into the possibilities of breakdown. The actual death rate of this particular virus is relatively low compared to
Yes.
those in the past. So it's not something I feel most people should be concerned about unless they happen to be extremely um, weak or compromised in their health, or extremely elderly, perhaps. Um, and even so, I think just working with building up the immune system is really the most important thing, which also
Yes.
requires that we stay within our center, that we keep calm, that we feed our bodies, nourish our bodies with food as well as with light, drinking lots of water, nourishing prana. So, doing breath exercises, practices, working with you know, deep meditation practices to be able to hold that light. Because it's really not something that's here to break down anything, it's really to build up. If there's a collapse, it's only a collapse of something that we've been ready to let go. So it's really a
Yes.
beautiful opportunity after a long, long time for a new awakening. And if people are able to hold that perspective, it changes everything. So here we have time, if we're forced to work from home or be at home, we're forced to communicate with each other directly rather than through, the artificial media. We're forced to connect with ourselves. We're forced to face our mortality. We're facing our divinity. So all of this is a collective process now. So one side of it, yes, there's um, all the fear energies that have been buried within human consciousness from generations ago that are rising to the surface. And on the other hand, we're opening to more and more light. And the light is going to bring up more fear. And as we hold this fear within the light, it dispels like clouds, like mist in the morning sky. So,
So, that's what I want to speak to. Today is called Gudi Padwa.
mm,
We also have the Parsi New Year, Navroz, and so on.
mm,
So interestingly, people may know more commonly the Navaratri, and that ends with Dashera in the second half of the year. But we also have another Navaratri that starts today. So, the new moon, the Amavasya was yesterday, and from starting today, there's 9 nights of the goddess,
mm,
all the way to the 3rd of April. And then I would expect on the 4th of April would be the 10th day of victory. And
mm,
so it's really about spring and new life and new beginnings and harvest and celebration. And the goddess comes in this fertile form in these 9 days, so to speak, right? So she's still vanquishing disease and pestilence and so on, but it's really about spring and new life and protection of that new life. So um, I would like to, close for today with getting a sense of aligning with these 9 nights and the Divine Mother's forces that will be pouring upon the planet at this time for renewal.
Mm.
And perhaps, just like Shiva has descended, and without him, the new creation would not have been possible. And what we are experiencing is you know, the, the slightly tricky integration of his force of transformation in the old paradigm. Um, on the 4th of April could be effectively the day of victory as the descent of the goddess in her full form. Now, Shiva's first wife Sati was dismembered, right? She was cut into many parts, and the time has come to remember the goddess. So just like
Mm.
Shiva has descended, his consort has to descend too. And
Mm.
his consort is in her fullness, the goddess Lalita. And
Who?
Sri Aurobindo in his book, The Mother, talks about the 4 powers, but then he also says there are many other wonderful personalities, but we've not been really capable of bearing and receiving them. And
Mm.
among them, there is one particular one he describes. He doesn't name her, but he says, she alone can bridge the highest heights with the lowest forms of matter. And
Ah.
when I've read up on Lalita, my sense
Mm.
is that is the goddess he's referring to. She is
Oh.
the Purna,
Yeah.
she's the complete goddess
Yeah.
who holds matter and spirit in herself
Well,
and expresses it as exquisite beauty. So, you know, these 9 nights could well end with the descent of Lalita on 4th of April.
mm.
Because without her too, this next creation is not possible,
Mm.
where heaven and earth are made one.
Right.
So
So,
Shiva and his consort Lalita, it could well be what this month of February and March and April are about.
mm. So I'm wondering if the experience that I was having in Peru, when the energy of Shiva was descending along with the Divine Mother, an aspect of the Divine Mother, whether that could have been Lalita. It's like
Possibly,
integrating.
possibly, because I feel quite sure that just like the new creation awaits Shiva and can't happen without him, in the same way it awaits Lalita, the
Yeah,
goddess Sri Aurobindo describes, who's going to be the bridge between
right,
the highest spirit and the lowest matter. Because
right.
again, without that, you can't integrate the dualities.
Yeah. And one thing I want to also remind us all is that this descent happens not in some kind of an amorphous way, um, independent of who we are. So it's our consciousness, our nervous system, that is the bridge. So those of us who can open ourselves to being this vehicle for descent, holding the power of Shiva, holding the power of Lalita, holding the power of this unified light, holding that supramental descent, through the higher levels of the mind, consciously surrendering to that, bringing it into the mind of the cells, going through whatever it takes to integrate that, which isn't always an easy process, as all of us have been experiencing, as the Mother and Sri Aurobindo experienced. It's not easy, but it's always joyful, as long
Yes.
as we can surrender to this. It's not easy simply because it's a way less traveled. It's a path less traveled. The body has not learned how to integrate that energy yet. But as it does so, as these pathways get created within a nervous system, there's so much light that pours in. There's so many possibilities that open, so many inner technologies that start to awaken that we haven't even dreamed about. So,
So this
suffering from.
reminds me. This reminds me of if salvation is physical, it's the root chakra that will be supramentalized fully, and the root chakra is 4 petals, so the number 4, and the month of April, just on cue, is the number 4. And so if this month of March was Mother Shri Aurobindo and Shiva, then with April, it'll be Mother Shri Aurobindo, Shiva, and Lalita, creating that
Mm,
pedestal of the 4 in the Muladhar of humanity, so that we are capable of integrating spirit and matter right down at that foundational level,
mm,
right? And for these ascents and descents to take place, it's much like trying to merge oil and water, or of course there will be it's not easy because these are discrete realms, and for the first time they are attempting to integrate. And that is why in our individual bodies and cells we may experience some kind of friction, and it's
mm,
just the integration that's uh, attempting to get done with as little friction as possible.
mm. Yeah, yeah. But I also want to acknowledge Satprem in all of this, because he continued the work of Sri Aurobindo and then the mother. And it's not always known, but he was able to plasticize his body uh, through this descent of supramental force, um, which was a continuation of the work that the mother was doing. For instance, he found that he was able to um, nourish his body on prana directly. And this is something many, many people are now experiencing around the world, that they do not require food or even water to nourish the body. They can receive this directly from the field of prana all around them.
Yes.
Also, where he was learning to um, develop an inner balance of fire, so he could manage to control his inner temperature as needed. Um, Things that are commonly practiced by the Tibetan yogis, for instance, but in a way that makes it accessible to everybody. And so
Yes.
I think is the gift of the supramental force is that what yogis and mystics have been doing for thousands of years in their secret caves and hidden away from the world now becomes possible for all of us. It's a species level transformation. It's not just for a select few. It's it's time finally that the new species can emerge from all this. And this is something that Mother Earth has been awaiting and moving towards for such a long time. And it's not just humans either. Every species on Earth is moving into its highest expression, as Mother Gaia is moving towards her highest expression, um, as a conscious, living, organic, divine being. So it's exciting, and what we understand of this is such a small slice of what's actually happening. And as we surrender to this flow of light, I think we are beginning to consciously become aware of more and more. But at first, it's always that um, mystery. We're stepping into this unknown place. We're experiencing things that are not always comfortable, that may be a bit scary. And it requires us to trust no matter what, knowing the big picture, knowing that um, this is an inevitable part of the journey.
Yes. And, to close for today, going back to mother's final years in her body and saying salvation is physical. So ultimately, the yoga will have to happen at a cellular level. And
Mm,
here we are, um, 64 years after the supramental anniversary, with a virus, which is essentially a cellular, organism, not even a cellular, it's kind of, no one knows whether it is a living creature or a non-living creature, because it becomes living only once it enters a host. Otherwise it's effectively not, but it's it's less than a cellular thing. And so the salvation, it's almost as if, of course, the final bastion that would have to be um, conquered for the new species would happen between a virus and a cell, you know.
mm,
Uh, so how amazing that this is what this is is happening globally, and if this is the meaning we make from it, and if we can leave here trusting that if we have invoked, mother says every prayer is answered, every call is met, and any way we have invoked the Divine Mother in any form,
Mm.
to trust that her force and her grace is with us, and our cells are being used to become her imaginal cells. And when we encounter the virus, we become the immune system
Yeah.
of the mother.
And there's one more thing to add to this. I was watching this video by Dr. Thomas Cowan, Cowan, and he says, and he goes back to World War One, the big epidemic that killed more people than actually perished in the war itself. And then along the years, there's been many different epidemics coming, moving through our uh, human consciousness. And he equates each of them with an electromagnetic event. So the first epidemic in 1917 was linked with the development of, I don't know if it was some kind of weaponry that used electricity. The next one had to do with the development of radar. In more recent years, they had to do with the development of mobile technology. You know, we have SARS and Zeta and so on. And he says this one could be related to the deployment of 5G, which is a very dangerous, weaponized technology. Also, we have the SpaceX technology where 20,000 satellites have been um, pushed out into space to create this net of
Yes.
effectively blanketing the whole Earth. And so this could be in response to that. But a virus, he says, is not something that attacks us, but it's actually toxic elements being released from our cells, which is a very different way of perceiving this. So we're actually adjusting to the new energies and transmuting what could have been. So the way I look at it from a supramental perspective, if the 5G weaponized um, millimeter wave technology can be used to destroy our immune system and could be used to control human minds, which is the part of the reason that they have been deployed. This can reverse that. Instead of controlling consciousness, this could actually be a way to um, transmute consciousness, to bring that supramental light through these technologies to transform the earth. And this is how the supramental force works. There's not so much an oppositional force between dark and light. It's
An
not a
integrated force.
it's an integrative force. So anytime there's a so-called act of from the asuras, from the dark forces, there's a corresponding integrating energy that comes through, which is not about destroying the asuras or getting rid of the dark forces or the cabal, the deep state, however we refer to this, but to transform them. It's like the mother says, all these asuras are also my children. You know, the asuras of death and darkness and falsehood, they're all part of my world. And so it's now time to transform them, not to create more of this conflict.
Yeah.
So that
But
also,
she did say they have given options. They can either transform and collaborate in the creation, or they can dissolve and leave. So
yeah,
they do have a choice. But they can't continue doing the destruction that they have been.
oh, the vibrational field is different now. Yeah,
Yes. Wow. So on that note, thank you so much, Kiara. Maybe
yeah.
we'll keep these conversations going. Maybe this was just episode 1. I call these Shakti Dialogues,
Hmm.
with experts I bring in, and I'll share this with you, post it wherever you think it'll be useful.
Yeah, are you
Forward to being
planning?
in touch.
Yeah, are you? Is this going to be a YouTube video or posting on your
Yes.
website? Okay.
It would go on YouTube, and then we can give the link to various things. So
Good. Well,
All right,
wonderful. It's
Kiara.
really lovely to reconnect with you, and let's keep
Yeah,
connected.
yes, let's track this together.
Yeah.
Much love and stay safe.
Okay, and blessings. Much
Thank
love to
you.
you.
Bye now.
Bye.